let's see what happened. So as you see, the course of psychodynamic theories this year, at the end, I decided to call it the language of existence. And the book of reference is very important, this thing. The book of reference is this one. Okay, do you see it? Okay. Okay, I have a copy here, but you know, the publisher is doesn't give lots of copies, so I have just 2 copies. And so I cannot share the copies with you. But the publishers say that they are doing now a flexible cover that will cost 20 euros. And if you do a bulk order, so if you arrange yourself to have a bulk order of this book, they make you the 20% of discount. So you pay 16 euros for everything. So at the end, I don't know if there is a representative here of the class. Usually there is someone who is the representative of the class. No, there is nobody here that is the representative of the class today. So if someone of you wants to write to the publisher, I can give you the address, the email address. You collect the orders and you say we need 6, 7, 8, okay? Copies or more copies if there are someone. Maybe tomorrow there will be more people, I don't know. I don't know exactly. Last year there were 35 people, now there is 2, 4, 6, 8 people. So I don't know how it works, this kind of waves in which there are lots of people, nobody, lots of people, nobody. I don't know how it works. But okay, let's see. So I give you an idea today how the course will go on in the future. So how will be the lessons in the future days. Starting from tomorrow. Tomorrow we will see at 9 o'clock, and the time is between 9, 10, 11, 12, I think, between 9 and 12, 3 hours. We can start, if there are problems to come here at 9, we can start at 9:15, something like this, if you want. So, the book is organized in chapters, and any chapter is connected to something that has to do with the title. So the title of the book is Language Without Sense, Glossolalia and Other Linguistic Explorations. So the first chapter is on lallation, on baby talk. Well, there is an introduction in which I explain the book, and I say more or less the thing that I'm explaining now. And then there is the first chapter, whose title is Lallation, the Language of the Infant. Lallation. Do you know what is lallation? Lallation is baby talk. Baby talk. And I make you some example here. Le, e, wo, del, those are lallations. So the sounds that the newborn, between the newborn, the first year of the newborn, when he start to make some word in what we call holophrase. in which there is the phenomenon of onomatopoeia, which is the phenomenon in which the child say horse, when you see the images of the horse and so on. Before of it, there are all these kind of, sounds or noises. So there is something that is between sound and noise, or between noise and sound. What is a noise? What is a noise? What is a sound? For example, if you have some musical here, you can see that, for example, when there is the traffic light, there are traffic lights that, for the blind people, make noise, make sounds like ding, 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 ding. If you have a musical here, you ding, 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 papa, 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 papa. So Beethoven, because it starts with this ding, 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 which is the same noise that makes some traffic light when a blind person have to cross the street and doesn't see the color. And there are things like this, So there is something that is around noise and sound. And it has no sense, but it can make sense. So, of course, in the first chapter, when we talk about la relation and baby talk, we will talk about Melanie Klein and Donald Winnicott. I'm sure that you have heard about Melanie Klein and Donald Winnicott. They are two, English, well, we will see later on, but English in the sense that both settled down in England, psychoanalyst, particularly Melanie Klein was the first psychoanalyst who disagreed with Sigmund Freud. She was a Jewish woman from Hungary, the first analyst. She was under, that at that time to become a psychoanalyst, you had to underpost to a psychoanalyst and do psychoanalysis. The first psychoanalysis she did was with Sándor Ferenczi, because she was living in Budapest, Hungary. Then she moved to Berlin, and she had the second psychoanalyst was Karl Abrams. There are many psychoanalysts whose name was Abrams, but this Abrams was the same Abrams that was working in Switzerland, nearby Ludwig Binswanger and Carl Gustav Jung in the Burgölzli clinic, was the clinic of Eugen Bleuler, Eugen or Eugene Bleuler. Okay? So when Ferenczi had this woman in analysis, he was writing to Freud, I have a fantastic woman in analysis. She is very expert in child psychoanalysis. Why he wrote this to Freud, Ferenczi? Because, at that time, Freud was very interested in trying to figure out how to watch, how to see the Oedipus, what they call Oedipus complex, watching at the children development. And the only experience he had was an experience with a child who was a child of a colleague of him, whose name was Hans. And but it was a weird experience because it was not very clear what was going on. So he wrote a book about it, the Kleine Hans. I don't know how do you translate in English. In Italian, is it piccolo Hans? I think the small Hans or the little Hans, something like this, which is the only experience of analysis that Freud had at that time with children, but it was not direct, it was indirect. So Freud was supervising Hans' father. Okay. So Ferenczi was watching at Melanie Klein as a woman who was very interested in doing work with children. She was very bright in doing this, okay? And he recommended to Freud this woman. Melanie Klein went to Berlin, and he was under the supervision, under the therapy, the second analysis with Abrams. And there was another woman who was under the analysis of Abrams at the time, was Madame Strachey, the wife of Strachey. Who is Strachey? Don't remember the name. Strachey is the official translator of Freud. A disaster, because in English Freud is unreadable, totally unreadable. They make a lot of mistakes. But, well, this is. His wife was in analysis in Berlin, nearby Melanie Klein. They know each other, they make friendship each other, and she wrote to England, to Strachey, to say, I knew a woman here that is fantastic with children. And so they invited Melanie Klein to London. It was, I think, 1926. So the psychoanalysis was already advanced and so on, more or less. I'm not sure about the date, but more or less would be. And when she came to London, she made a conference in London, and everybody, all the psychoanalysts in London, immediately fall in love with her ideas about children. And Jones, who is Ernst Jones, who is the official translator of Freud, Ernst Jones, sorry, the official biographer of Freud, the official translator was Strachey, the official biographer was Jones. Jones asked her to follow his children, okay? So she was fantastic. Mm-hmm. I will talk to you more about Melanie Klein during the next lesson. For now, I am presenting this woman. And I wanted to stress that starting from the beginning, she said, I disagree with Freud. For example, I disagree with Freud about the creation of the ego. She said, no, the ego, the I, or the me, no, in English it's very tricky. It's there starting from the beginning. It's not something that comes later on. And this is very important. Another very important concept is the concept of position versus phase. So Freud was telling about the phase of development of the child. She said, no. since the ego is from the beginning, I will not talk about phases of development, but I will talk about the position that the child takes. So the subject, the subjectivation, is present from the very beginning. And this is the reason because I wrote this book, because I consider the lalation, so the verses that I uttered before, like a language of a subject. Even though we don't understand immediately what does it mean. A language with no meaning, a language with no sense. Okay? Then the other guy, psychoanalyst that I would like you to know a little bit more is Donald Winnicott. Donald Winnicott was not a follower of Melanie Klein. It's interesting because all the followers of Melanie Klein, the interesting follower of Melanie Klein, did the same movement that Melanie Klein did with Freud. So it's interesting what Freud says, but I disagree with this. A dissension. We will see that dissension is very important in the development of a science, of knowledge. Always there is a dissension. There must be a dissension, a critical attitude toward what I learn. It's not, if not, it is dogmatism, okay? For example, Wilfred Bion was an Indian psychoanalyst. He was a student of Melanie Klein, and he said, no, I disagree with Melanie Klein, for example, in the idea of identific projection like something negative. And he said, no, to me, identificative projection is something that is very important to do therapy, for example, with people that are schizophrenic people. We'll see later on this. Donald Winnicott never agreed totally with Melanie Klein, even for political reasons, because Melanie Klein had problems in the International Psychoanalytic Association. Not just for her disagreement with Freud, but for her disagreement with the daughter of Freud, Anna Freud, who was a terrible therapist. I don't like at all Anna Freud. All the new trends of connecting TCC, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, with psychoanalysis comes from Anna Freud. And I don't agree at all with the theory of attachment comes from Anna Freud. And I don't agree at all with this. Donald Winnicott was very important because Donald Winnicott started from Melanie Klein, from the idea of Melanie Klein, to develop a passage between what Melanie Klein was calling schizoid position to what she called depressive position. So she said the infant passes from the schizoid position to the depressive position. And Winnicott added something very interesting. To pass through this, to pass from the schizoid position to the depressive position, and then to pass from the depressive position to something else, the child must pass through a transitional object. So transition. This is the reason one of the reasons because my school is called transcultural, transitional objects. So we are systemic, but we make a lot of value to Winnicott. What is transition? Transition, recently there is a philosopher who wrote a book whose title is a French philosopher, Bernard Stiegler, who wrote a book whose title is Pharmacology. I don't know if it has been translated in English. It has been translated recently in Italian by Orthotes, a very interesting home press publisher of Naples. Very interesting. And what is the connection between Stiegler, a philosopher, and Winnicott? He says that the psychoanalyst has insisted with the object, the transitional object. He said the transition in Winnicott is not necessarily connected with an object. The transition in Winnicott is what the mother transmits to the child as the idea that life is something valuable or viable to live. So that life is viable to live, that it's worth to live a life. In Italian it's translated it vale la pena di vivere. And in French there is an expression, I don't remember, but there is an expression in which they say vale la pena, we translate vale la pena with this other expression in French. It's viable to live. I would translate in English this word. Life is viable to live. Transitional object is something that has to deal with something that is viable to live. So the confidence, the trust in life. We will see later on, in the next lesson, probably something more about it. But this is something that the transitional object is valuable to live. So Melanie Klein and Donald Winnicott are very interesting nowadays because they gave us a different perspective from the one that, the psychologists, the mainstream psychologists have in mind, the cognitive behavioral idea, of the attachment idea, of, the good mother, the bad mother, these kind of things, that I don't agree at all. There are not bad mother. Maybe they are not even good mother because we are not moralist. We work with ethics, not with moral. And if you ask me, the difference that I explained, the difference between moralism and ethics. There are two very important different things. Okay, this would be probably the first part of my lessons on this topic. The second part of the lessons, the second chapter of the book, is called Erolalia. It is interesting because the scene that you are going to see over there, it is far to be an erotic scene as in the mainstream, no? Because in the mainstream, eros is connected to pornography or to sexuality in general, no? This is an old idea. So we should here to make reference to another important psychologist, philosopher, and historian, French, whose name is Michel Foucault. In a brief interview in English, you can find it, Foucault on Desire on YouTube. It's 3 minutes in interview. Foucault says something that is very interesting. He says, well, psychoanalysts love to talk about desire. No, they don't talk about pleasure, but they talk about desire. And he said, this is connected to the idea of sexuality as a root of everything in life of many psychoanalysts. So many psychoanalysts think that desire is a sexual desire. Michel Foucault was writing 4 volumes on the history of sexuality, very important volumes. And he said something about another utterance that he used instead of desire, which is the use of pleasure. So he said, sexuality is not connected with desire, it is connected with the use of pleasure. In the Roman antiquity, before the Christianity, and he said also in the Oriental way of living, even though I don't know exactly, but I read something about the Oriental way of living, and he said, in this world, sexuality is connected with the use of pleasure. Okay? So it's not something prohibited. It's something that is in Oriental world is sacred, is holy. No, the Kama Sutra is a holy book of on sexuality. So he said, this idea of desire as something that has to deal with a prohibited thing is typical of the psychoanalysis, and before psychoanalysis is typical of the Christianity. So from the first Christianity, from Augustine to Freud, there is this idea that sex is something forbidden, something sinful. And so this idea of desire connected to this is something that is wrong, he said. And we are seeing here in this picture something different. Erolalia, eros, is not just something that has to deal with sex, but has to deal with this role of women. So what is the role of women in Western societies? It is the feminine stance. Feminine stance is something that deals with the fact that there is a poem by Goethe. Goethe is a German writer, poet of between the 18th and the 19th century. Between this era, there was this, in the German Romanticism, there were a lot of very important writers in philosophy, like Hegel, Schelling, Fichte, and then Marx, and Feuerbach and Marx, and then in Nietzsche at the end, and in literature, like Schiller, like Hölderlin, or like Goethe, okay? And Goethe wrote a poem whose title is Faust. What is Faust? It's a story that Goethe brought from a kind of folk tale. What is a folk tale? Something that people tell mouth by mouth, orally and so on, in the German world. And there was a work in a writer, the same era of Shakespeare. There was another writer in England whose name was Marlowe, who made Dr. Faustus, made something about Faust. But in general, Faust, who was Faust? Faust was a kind of person who wanted to know everything. And in this desire of knowing everything, he met the devil. And the devil said to him, let's exchange the blood, and you will mine. In change of it, I give you the knowledge of everything. And Faust accepted this pact, the pact with the devil, okay? But the pact was, I made you know everything, but when I keep you in the hell. I bring you to the hell. And Faust say, to know everything here, I am at disposition to you to go to follow you in the hell. So was the pact in the poem. But there was a moment in the poem of Goethe in which the devil was bringing Faust to the hell, but from the heaven it appeared the eternal feminine, the ewige weiblich. There is a German woman here. Weiblichkeit. Ewige Weiblichkeit. Mm-hmm. The eternal feminine. The eternal feminine. That take Faust from the devil and they save him to put him on the heaven. Save him from the hell and put it on the heaven. So Faust at the end was saved by the ewige Weiblichkeit, from the eternal feminine. This idea of eternal feminine, well, it was a poem, of course, but the metaphor of eternal feminine was kept by the fact that Goethe was very sensitive man, was interested in what women were doing around him. So when there was the war, the women, not just the nun in the Catholic Church, but even the women in other places, were the ones who cured the wounded people, were the ones who helped raise children, were the ones who did a lot of things. And we will see why later on in our lessons. But this is connected to the fact that the women in the Western society belong to what the ancient Greek called stomadulon. What is a stomadulon? It's a word that used Euripides in a tragedy whose title is Ion. Stomadulon means slave mouth. So the slave language. But this will come later on. Then the next lesson will be on coprolalia. What is coprolalia? you'll see here something that is the opposite of what you say before. No, you say before a woman was taking care of wounded men. Here you say a picture that comes from a fantastic movie by Francis Ford Coppola, an Italian-American art director, movie maker. This is the second best masterwork of Francis Ford Coppola, in my view. The first one is Rumblefish, that never saw, it was a disaster economically, but it's fantastic. And the second one is Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is the movie in which there is this song of the Doors. This is the end. The end, my friends. No? In this movie, there is what is going on now in Gaza, what is going on now in Ukraine, which is, and in other places, in Sudan, for example, South Sudan, and in other lots of places, which was at that time the Vietnam War. So Apocalypse Now is what was going on in Vietnam War. Why I put it now as a picture? Because coprolalia is connected to the masculine way of talking. Masculine way of talking. It's not just the war, but the war is, in my view, a consequence of the masculine aggressivity and way of talking. Starting from when you are driving a car, oh, fuck you, oh. These kind of things, people that are prone to fight each other. You know, if you go on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, you see a lot of scenes in which men are prone to on the street, are prone to fight one to the other, and this kind of coprolalia, you know, motherfucker, and so on, these kind of things that are, you know, I don't say that women are all aerolalic and men are all coprolalic. I would say something different. In the book is very clear. No, in the book I don't say. Let me try to find something. No, in the book. Let me find, if I found. Ecolalia, no, this is advanced. Okay, coprolalia. Oh, of course, there are also artistic expression of coprolalia, no? For example, Antonin Artaud, and so on. Okay, I will see in the next lesson. Then we shift on ecolalia. You see a scene of an old guy who, after a stroke on the brain, has got into aphasia. What is aphasia? Aphasia is a way in which a person cannot express what you want to express with the usual language he uses. So we don't understand what he's saying. This is a typical situation in which the neuropsychologist, this woman on the right side, is showing to this man some pictures of something that is going on on this sheet, no? A picture, some pictures. And the wife is here to assist him, but she couldn't say anything. And the man, who is the person who has the stroke, has to describe what is going on. For example, there could be a scene in which there is a guy who is running a bike, and then a guy who jumped down to the bike. He had an accident, and then the guy with a leg that is broken, and so on, no, something like this. And the person has to say, well, this is a scene of a guy who is going to a bike, is running a bike, but he got into an accident, and then after the accident he broke the leg, and so on. This is a normal description of a banal, trivial scene, no? But this guy says something like, c'era un bordello, tutto era rotto, the bike, and this kind of thing. He is absolutely convinced that he is describing the scene, but the words that come have no sense at all for the locutor. So the locutor doesn't understand what he is saying. And this is called echolalia in technical sense in Europe. Well, in technical sense, it would be jogality. So there are jogality and echolalia. But when you say a person who has had a stroke and is aphasic, when you see him, you say, hello, Mr. Brown, how are you? And he answers, hello, Mr. Brown, how are you? I'm well. So he has to repeat as an echo what you said, echolalia. And jogality is this way. Can you describe what is going on here? It's a say, I don't understand anything, okay?
Are these characteristics of diseases that happen repeatedly, or is it just a phenomenon that sometimes I do it as well?
No, it's a characteristic of the stroke. So there is an area, the Wernicke area in the brain, which is damaged. And, for example, a focal lesion in the brain that makes this happen. Okay? After a while, after 30 days of rehabilitation and so on, this man, or the person who is aphasic, recovers this aphasia. And he can restart to speak. Then we will see what happened in this phenomenon, because you can start to speak. If, for example, you are a bilingual person, there is a problem. Or trilingual person, there is a problem. Which is the language you recovered before? And there are things very interesting in this way. We will see in the next lesson, because then echolalia is also connected with an investigation we did, for example, with autistic people. I wrote a chapter in a book. The reference of the book is, there are no blackboards here. It's incredible. We can dance. There is nothing. There is no blackboard to write. So the title of the book is one of the editor of the book is Maria Elena Bartesari, Bartesaghi, Bartesaghi, Maria Elena. And the title of the book is Disability in Dialogue. Inside the book, there is a chapter written by Laura Sterponi from Berkeley University, myself, and Enrico Valtellina, who is the most important Italian representative of the disability studies, is a philosopher. And we three are working on the use of a thinker, which is a writer, a Russian writer, whose name is Mikhail Bakhtin, over the autistic communication. And it is very interesting the fact that with Laura Sterponi, the one from Berkeley, was able to make some video of the interaction between a mother and a child, autistic child, in which they saw the echolalia as a kind of interaction between the mother and the child, in which anytime one of the two start this game, this linguistic game. So echolalia is seen as a kind of linguistic game, not in Wittgenstein concept, but in Bakhtinian context. So a kind of heteroglossy, as they say, heteroglossia, is the word that translate the word raznici from Russian, heteroglossia, which is the English translation of it. So the next chapter, this chapter is on echolalia. Echolalia is sound that has no meaning, has no sense in some way, but is connected to something. Then now I'm talking just about the psychological phenomenon. But any of the psychological phenomenon I mention is connected to literature. I already mentioned about Goethe, for example, in Eulalia. When I was talking about coprolalia, I can mention, for example, Antonin Artaud. Antonin Artaud was a coprolalic poet. No, for example, l'homme. The man is. It is l'homme est mal construit. Il faut. Now I don't remember the verses, but there are the verses in which he say that the man is like an animal that stay in the hole of the anus of the world. I don't know in Spanish, I don't know how to, piattola in Italian. Piattola is a kind of animal, tiny animal that is, I don't know in Brazilian, what is the name of this animalcule in French. In Italian is piattola. It's a kind of white animal, very tiny animal that stays in the hole of the anus. Nel buco del culo, in the hole of the anus. And this is Artaud, no? This is Artaud. So Artaud uses the coprolalia as an art of poetry. Echolalia. For echolalia, we have a lot of poetries. Like for example, I'm sure you know, no? Children, coprolalia. Well, Jabberwocky. Have you read Lewis Carroll, Alice's in Wonderland, Alice in Wonderland, no? Jabberwocky's twas brillig and the filthy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. Old Mimsy were the burgoves and the moon wraths of Grabe. Beware the Jabberwocky, my son. Any English person, even a native, doesn't understand anything about it because it's meaningless. This is ecolalia. We have in Italy a poet who was an anthropologist that was working in Japan, Fosco Maraini, who wrote some metasemantic poetry. And one is translated into English, the Rumfus. The Rumfus neither waterloos nor crackles, and it very rarely coves. But when the icy zephyrs knuckles, and so on and so on. So those are metasemantic poems in which what counts is the sound that comes from the mouth. Okay? So this is, okay.
So is ecolalia not always the repetition of something? No.
No, ecolalia in technical sense, neurology is a repetition of something from echo. Echo is a divinity that repeats what you say. So from echo. When you are on the mountain, you say, mama, mama, something like this, no? Ecolalia is a repetition of something, technically in neurology. But there is a fantastic book that I follow here by Helle Roazen, who is a linguist, a student of Roman Jakobson, who wrote this book, whose title, you can find it in English, Ecolalias, in which the first two chapters are dedicated to the children, and the third chapter is dedicated to the aphasic people. So what is the theory of Roman Jakobson and Daniel Herler Roazen is that a child at the very beginning, when he doesn't speak, he possesses all the sounds that when he starts to learn a language, loses. So, for example, in French, you say ah. In English, you say R. And in Italian, you say R. Okay? If you learn R, you lose R and you lose R. No? And when you start to learn French or English, you have to learn again, not the good pronouns. So the child possesses every sound, but in the apprenticeship of this language, he loses other sounds. It is fantastic because he said the process of learning is not the process of gaining something. It is a process of losing something, losing sounds. And you know, if you interrogate someone who, for example, is a singer, a professional singer, for example, of jazz, they understand perfectly what I'm saying, no? Because something that you have to learn. It's not something that to say not like this, me, but to learn in a way that is professional. You have to study a lot to learn to sing, no? So this is something that belongs to the fact that language, there are a lot of languages that have no sense at all. Okay? Then the next chapter, the penultimate chapter of the book, is connected to glossolalia. What is glossolalia? You can find glossolalia in schizophrenia. What Gilles Deleuze, which is a philosopher we will attend during the lessons. It is the philosopher I refer the more. Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari was a psychoanalyst, very important psychoanalyst, and Julia Kristeva, another. But in glossolalia is a kind of schizophrenic radial, segmental delirium. Segmental delirium. So Deleuze says there are two regimes of delusion. Well, it was translated in delirium, but it is delusion. There are two regimes of delusion. The one is a radial delusion. What is the radial delusion? The radial delusion is the paranoid one. So we are here, but here around there is some camera run from the CIA, and they are spying us, and so on. This is a radial delusion. I am spied by someone. I met a lot of delusional people. For example, many years ago when I was in Milan, there was a guy who came and said the mayor is persecuting me. The mayor is persecuting me because when I drive the car, he is putting always the red light traffic to stop me. This was a kind of radial delusion. Was the first radial delusional guy that I met. Then there are another kind of delusion, which is the segmental delusion. So the segmental delusion is something that belongs to people like a guy that I met who started to stop to talk with parents and started to talk with the dogs. They had two dogs in the family, and he started to move and talk with the dogs, as the dog, the third dog. Okay? But a segmental delusion can easily turn into a radial delusion. It depends on the intervention of the psychiatric unit. For example, the psychiatric unit, when the father brought him to psychiatry for this reason, the psychiatrist told the father secretly put this medication in the food of him because it's dangerous. And in the very moment they came back home, he started to starve, to feast, not to fast, feast or fast, I don't remember what is fast, to fast, because he was thinking that they were poisoning the food. So the psychiatry unit turned this way of talking with the dogs, which is a segmental delusion, into an idealization of something that was a persecution, that the parents were putting the poison, so into a radial one. So glossolalia is more the segmental delusion. Okay? Glossolalia is something that has to do also with what we call xenolalia. Xenolalia. What is xenolalia? Is talking with another language. So xenolalia could be very similar to Jabberwocky and so on. So xenolalia, for example, there is something that in French is called gramelot. You know what is gramelot? Gramelot is a kind of way of acting of some actor, some person of theater. For example, there is an Italian guy whose name was Dario Fo. He was using a gramelot, an English gramelot, in which he was talking, apparently was talking as it was English, but he went to London to make this piece of theater in which he was a nobleman of England, but nobody understood what he was saying because he was talking as it was English, but nothing was English. No? Or another guy was using, I don't know if you have heard about an Italian singer, rock singer, whose name was Adriano Celentano. He was making a song, was Presi Colimen Clemenciuso, which apparently was English, but nothing English was. Or there is another guy who is Kusturica, is a kind of art director from Serbia, I think, and he was doing a movie in which there is a guy who sang a song by Celentano, 24.000 baci, but a part of 24.000 baci, the rest of the song is not Italian. 24.000 baci, così malla patala fora. So there is nothing. There is no meaning in this. So the Pentecostal people, so there is a religion which is a very spread religion in the United States, also in Africa now, and I think in Brazil is coming to become very important, which is a very scary religion because it is not a religion with a pope, with a chief, or with a kind of dogma, but is a religion who is spread around. And, the priests of this religion make a lots of money because the poor people go there to salvation. And give a lot of offers. And those priests became very, very rich. And they found some organization and someone will talk about. So the Pentecostal also talk about xenolalia. So what is xenolalia? What is the beginning of xenolalia? In the Christianity, the beginning of xenolalia is connected with the Pentecost, with the day of Pentecost. That I think it's the 24th of March. I don't know where is it, because a Catholic don't. I'm not Catholic in the sense that I go to the Holy Mass every week, but I am raised up in a Catholic country, and we don't. But the Protestant people are more connected with the Pentecost. It is the day in which the Holy Spirit went to the apostles and gave them the languages. So to evangelize, to make the Gospels, to evangelize every country in the different kind of language. It's a matter of fact that the Gospels are written in Greek and not in Jewish for this, not in Hebrew, sorry, for this reason. And then what else? Schizophrenic people, xenolalia, glossolalia, and then, of course, Antonin Artaud. Antonin Artaud, and what I can read of Antonin Artaud. I make some example of Antonin Artaud. Now we are glossolalia. Glossolalia, Antonin Artaud. Ok, Rai da canca da cum a cum, danacum vönok sanatanan fantanatanaf tamafsbai. The peyote dance. So when Artaud was under the influence of the peyote, he was writing these verses. So another thing that brings glossolalia is sometimes the use of peyote, LSD, or some ayahuasca, or some kind of hallucinogen drugs. Okay? Gives the capability to talk in a language that is a glossolalic language. So you will ask, what is the difference between echolalia and glossolalia? No, because it is. Well, echolalia is more metasemantic, is more connected to some neurologic problem, in my view. Glossolalia is something more incomprehensible in general and more connected to the language inside, not something that has to do with the neuro-language, but something that has to do with the communication with the other. So I don't believe, for example, that the schizophrenic delusion is something that has to do with the brain damage. Never. They put a lot of money to find, but never found something about the brain damage of schizophrenic people. So schizophrenia is something that has to deal with, we will see when we will talk about the anti-Oedipus, when we talk about schizoanalysis, is a way of staying into the world. Okay? We'll see later on. Then you probably recognize this picture because it's taken from the Pedra do Sal, Rio de Janeiro, and this is the face of a Yoruba slave. Pedra do Sal was a place in which in Rio de Janeiro, starting from the 17th century on, there was the market of the slaves. So the slaves that were brought by the Portuguese or Netherlands or English or whatever ships from Africa, they went to Africa, they kidnapped people, they put those people into the boats, and many of them died. And recently in Rio de Janeiro, when I was there last time, I think it was 2018 or 16, I don't remember now exactly. There was the Olympiad, the Olympic game. And in doing the Olympic game, they made a lot of, works, architectural, engineeristic works, and they opened lots of hole in the earth, and they find lots of thumbs, collective thumbs, a lot of skeletons of African people, particularly a group of African people from what we call now Nigeria, and they call themselves, and we we should call them, Yoruba. Yoruba is a kind of a group of people that is living between Nigeria, Niger, and other places around. Usually they now are English speaking because in Nigeria, English were the colonizer of this area. And they were put in the market Pedra do Sal, where the Portuguese people, the colonizer, were going there to buy those people to make work them in the cotton fields or in the fields of cocoa or whatever in the countryside. So now Pedra do Sal is a place in which they play samba. It's fantastic. But there is this memory. There is this. I think I hope there will be. I took this picture, but there are other pictures and so on of this. Stomadulon. What is a stomadulon? Stomadulon, this is the last chapter of the book. Stomadulon. It is the stomadulon. In this chapter, there is a dream of a Yoruba young woman who, because the slavism is not ended up. So a group of nuns from Spain that are here in Bergamo have a house, a secret house, in which they keep young women that were rescued from the prostitution. And there is an international treat of prostitution that comes from France and goes to Spain, to Italy, and wherever, of Yoruba young women that are kidnapped from Nigeria. And I had this privilege of working with this, I think 13 years old woman